Okay. Hello, welcome to the class. Before we begin, just a couple of things. You should have received an email recently with a number of important points of information. Just wanted to bring it up while I still have you. There is a community Seder planned for the first night, April 5th, 8 o'clock. There's already people who signed up. There's an early bird registration, which was supposed to be yesterday. I believe we're extending that. Anyway, register if you haven't yet. Also, the Sunday, in 3 days from now, we'll be having a tour of Kiel's at 1 p.m. Shopping tour. We'll show you what's kosher, what's not, what's new, and all that sort of thing. On that same email, there's also a delegation of power for sale of chametz. You are supposed to sell your chametz that you own through the rabbi, through a rabbi, and there's a link to a document there that'll help you do that. And also there's an opportunity to participate in Ma'ot Chitim, which is a special tzedakah that's supposed to be given to the poor of one's community or Israel for the purpose of celebrating Pesach. There's a way to do that there. And last but not least, there's a list to our Pesach video playlist of all the video classes that we have on YouTube for the past few years, classes on how to keep Pesach, insights into the Haggadah, laws of the Seder, everything you'd ever want to know about Pesach should be there. And of course, we're still giving classes here as well, God willing, next week on those topics as well. Without further ado, let's get into the Parsha. This Parsha begins Sefer Vayikra. In English, it's called Leviticus, which is or I guess it's Greek, but whatever. Either way, that's what it's called, and it's mostly about, as the name would imply, it's about the Levitical laws. It's about the laws of the priesthood of Judaism, what had to be done in the Mishkan and later on in the Beit Hamikdash in terms of sacrifices. Not all sacrifices, as we'll see, are animal sacrifices. There's also there's birds, right? There's doves, and there's also the mincha, which is unbaked flour, baked dough, fried dough, all kinds of interesting things. There's the korban omer in this week's parsha. We had to make sure there's no yeast or honey was allowed to go on the mizbeach, but everything had to be salted. All korbanot, all animal sacrifices were definitely salted. And when we translate, by the way, just we're going to put that out there because we've learned about this in previous years, but it's always good to remember when we say sacrifice in terms of korban, we're just using an English word that is completely nonsensical and has no relation to what a korban really is. Korban from the word karov, which has something to do with closeness. Rav Hirsch, I think we might have learned this one inside. If not, either way, he makes it very clear that a korban does not have at least in the Western languages that he was aware of. There's no real word that really translates korban perfectly. It's not really an offering. You're not giving anything to Hashem. Hashem doesn't need anything, and it's not a sacrifice. You're not losing anything. It's kind of the opposite. You're gaining something. You're gaining a relationship with Hashem by doing what He has asked you to do. It's almost like I think I've given the analogy before of sort of like a tractor beam from science fiction. That's the closest that we have to a word that means what Rav Hirsch is sort of alluding to, the sort of the thing that connects things by a pull. So we have all kinds of the offerings. Very often there's a mistake that needs to be corrected, and that is that many people think the korbanot have to do with sin offerings. There is such a thing as a sin offering. The end of the parsha deals with the details of certain kinds of sin offerings, whether they're done by a regular person, or by a leader, by the congregation. So there's that. But the more important thing that we need to remember about a korban chatat, a sin offering, is that it's never on purpose. In other words, when you sin on purpose, giving an offering won't do any good. every single sin offering that has an effect is a sin offering that is bishgaga, that is accidental, an accidental sin. So one that you weren't planning on doing, one that you didn't know you were doing, or any other kind of excuse. So a sin offering is only for those kinds of sins. So that's that. We've spoken in previous years why an accidental sin, you have to bring a korban. A purposeful sin, you don't bring a korban. So it seems sort of unfair. One of the answers I believe we gave is that the sin offering is a kapara. It forgives you if you want to be forgiven for the thing you did. But if you did a sin on purpose, and even if you regret it at this point, that's not enough. A korban is not enough for for the kind of teshuvah that you need to do. And by the way, it's also worth remembering that all of the korbanot, including the sin offering, is only as effective as the person's emotions when they give it. So if they have the wrong intent or the wrong ideas or whatever they're thinking when they're giving the korban has nothing to do with what Judaism really wants a korban to mean. So the korban they brought is meaningless, more or less. It has not affected teshuvah and has not affected whatever other thing you're bringing the korban for. And of course, the last thing I wanted to say about that before we get into the parsha itself is that we don't have korbanot today. That shouldn't be new to you. But what we do have is we have prayer. And prayer is very similar in that sense, that you're sort of dedicating a time of your day. You're perhaps losing some money out of it, right? You could be working or whatever, or sleeping, or relaxing, and all of that's worthwhile. And it's time is money, and so that's sort of like the animal that you're giving up, right? And on the other hand, you're requesting things, and again, kavanah, your intent matters. So if you're saying these prayers because you think it's some sort of like a magic spell that's going to make things happen, so you have the wrong kavanah. That's not how prayer works. And that's worthy of a bigger discussion on how prayer works, which is maybe for another time. Meanwhile, though, we're going to get right into the parsha. We're going to have a lot of people think that there's really nothing to say about Vayikra. It's just a list of korbanot and how to give them. No, that's not exactly true. We have plenty to say on every parsha, Baruch Hashem, lots of ancient commentaries and more modern commentaries that we're going to see inside. Let's get right into this is the this should be, if you're seeing what I'm seeing, this should be the source sheet that I sent out also by email from Sefaria for this parsha. We're going to start today with the introduction of the Meshech Chachma on Sefer Vayikra. So a lot of the commentaries, the Ramban famously and others, at each Sefer, at each of the 5 books of Moses, they have an introduction to explain what they think is the core meaning of the book, or really how it distinguishes itself from the other of the 5 books. So there's something unique about Vayikra, and it's worth studying what that is. That's basically what the Ramban does. Now, the Meshech Chachma here has an interesting, very important distinction to be made about the korbanot. Now, we know, we've brought this in previous classes, that there's a difference of opinion about how korbanot work. We had a whole list, actually, of ideas. Famously, we had the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim in his Guide to the Perplexed. The Rambam says that korbanot were brought primarily as a means to avoid idol worship. The idol worshippers were, and probably still are, people who brought certain kind of sacrifices, animal sacrifices, human sacrifices, etc. And so to distinguish ourselves from them and sort of to not be tempted to do what they do, we also get that. So we might have a natural human need to bring korbanot, just like people, like everybody does. And so in order that we not do the wrong thing, we have a kosher way to bring korbanot. That's the way the Rambam learns this entire thing. The Ramban argues, Nachmanides, as usual, he argues with the Rambam, and he says something, basically, he says, his main argument is, how could you say such a thing? Korbanot were not a new invention that just came out, 3,000 years ago. Korbanot were brought by Adam Arishon. Adam brought sacrifices. Noach brought sacrifices. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Everybody brought sacrifices. It's not a non-Jewish concept that we're trying to mimic in some way in order to have a kosher avenue for korbanot. So korbanot isn't just like a non-Jewish thing that we're also trying to sort of adapt so that we don't lose any Jews along the way. That's not how. That's not. The Ramban says that's not how we can understand korbanot. So the Meshech Chochma is actually going to do what you might think is completely impossible. He's going to make peace between these two ideas. All right. Hakaidmonim, the early ones, and he's obviously referring to Rambam and Ramban, Nechleku and others as well. Nechleku b'ta'am hakarbanot. They argue about the reason for korbanot. Hamore, that's the More in Nevuchim, that's the Rambam. Amar ki hu laharchik lev adam me'avodah zarah. So, like I said, it's to train a person's heart away from avodah zarah. Ramban, and then I didn't really bring this up, but the Ramban has his own reason for korbanot. Siyato Amr, he and others who agree with him say, ki hu lahakrev kol kochot ha'olamot v'hu inyan electriki ruchni. So he says that basically it has to do with, it's a deep Kabbalistic concept, and he's going to basically leave it at that, but it has to do with the kochot ha'olamot, all of the powers of all the worlds are all trained into one thing, and he says that this is electriki ruchni. This is like sort of a spiritual electricity, right? It combines these different ideas all into one. Asher ha'pu'ulot ha'kohen yaseh gavohot ma'olamot shonim kiyadua. The Kohen does puts all of these things together, and so two very different ideas of what the korban can do. Right? He says, "V'ulai maybe yesh lahachriya." Maybe we can find a common ground. Maybe there's a way to settle this argument. This is the beauty of Torah, right? Because you have these two very, very seemingly opposite ideas of what the korbanot do, and then comes along a Talmud Chacham, a good 800 years after the Ramban, and he says, no, you know what? I think we can make pshara. We can make a achriya here. We can make peace between these two giants. How? Korbanot bama hem rak laharchik avodah zarah milvavot amo Yisrael. So there's a thing called a bama, not to be confused with the President Obama. There's a thing called a bama, which is usually translated in English as a raised platform, and it is said that when there was a Mishkan, you could bring sacrifices of your own elsewhere, like at your own house, your own backyard. You can build up a bama, make a sacrifice there for Hashem. You don't have to bring it to the Mishkan. As opposed to once the Beit HaMikdash was built, and ever since, once that happened, once there's a Beit HaMikdash, you can't do that anymore. You can't have a private bama. You need to have, you need to bring sacrifices strictly in the Beit HaMikdash. Nowhere else. If you want to bring something to Hashem elsewhere, it needs to be prayer, tefillah. It can't be a sacrifice. So that's what it says. So it's commanded ki yaktiru l'shem shemayim lo ken karbonot meha Beit Hamikdash hema vade lekarev olamot lechaver dodim. So it's like I said, ever since the Beit Hamikdash was built, there's only one place, one address in the entire world where a Jew can bring sacrifices, and that's the Beit HaMikdash. Let's skip the brackets here. In Makor Lazen, the reason for this, why do we make a distinction for Bamot with the Beit HaMikdash without the Beit HaMikdash? Ha d'tnan reish prat chatat ein reach nichoach b'bama ktana harei the kadshe bama inan reach nichoach. So when it comes to a sacrifice, there's something called a reach nichoach, which is usually translated as a pleasant aroma or sweet smelling odor. And that's it's a very complicated thing. We'll actually, it's going to be part of God willing the Shabbat drasha this year, but this week, this year, this year, and the right. So, but there's no such reference of the sweet smelling smell when it comes to this raised platform, this bama. Okay. Ubeze yuvan ha the Rabbi Nathan hanodar ki elu bana bama, when you make a bama hainu shabama hu ligdor atzmo avodah zarah. So the bama itself is specifically for training a person away from avodah zarah. It says it in the Gemara. Aval bezman shebeit hamikdash kayam, when there's a beit hamikdash, who user rasha b'ma shehuda shegoder atzma avodah zarah v'ha benodar debone bam. So it's you don't need that with a Beit Hamikdash. You don't need to be. You're not tempted by avodah zarah when there's a Beit Hamikdash. You see, you look at Tanakh. Fascinating thing. When you look at if you learn Nach, you'll see that when there's a Beit Hamikdash, there was rarely a need for avodah zarah. Other places where they didn't have a Beit Hamikdash, amongst the 10 tribes, there's a lot of avodah zarah, etc., because they weren't allowed to go to the Beit Hamikdash. But in general, the Beit Hamikdash made avodah zarah seem ridiculous. It was useless. So that's why you didn't need a bama then. So in saying this, what he's basically saying is this: we've got the Rambam and we've got the Ramban. And the Rambam said that the korbanot, the sacrifices to train a person away from avodah zarah, and the Ramban says no, it's to create this whole spiritual electricity of connecting this world to Hashem's world, etc., etc. All right. So, how could you make peace between those two ideas? Simple, says the Meshech Chochmah. It depends on what you're talking about. When you're talking about a time when there were bamot, when people could when that's what bamot were for training people away from avodah zarah. So you have your own outlet for that natural physical need to bring sacrifices. You have a kosher way to do that. So that's when the Rambam is right. The Ramban is talking about after the Beit Hamikdash, when we don't have bamot anymore, when korbanot were simply and specifically, I don't know, simply is not the right word, specifically for the spiritual energy that is created. So they don't have to necessarily be arguing. They're talking about different stages in Jewish history when indeed both opinions are indeed correct, which makes for a beautiful compromise from the Meshech Chochmah. So that's just from his introduction to Vayikra. So now let's get into the first verses of Vayikra. Vayikra starts interestingly. There's actually amongst commentaries, there's probably more written on the first few verses of Vayikra than maybe the rest of the parsha. Nice. All right. So Vayikra el Moshe. And he called unto Moshe. No, but if you're following historically or chronologically from when we had the end of the previous sefer, the end of Shemot, Okay. From the end of Shemot. We saw that the Mishkan was built, and Hashem's cloud covered the Mishkan, and nobody was allowed inside. Even Moshe was among the other people; he was not inside. Then we have this Vayikra El Moshe, and he called unto Moshe, V'daber Hashem Elav, and he spoke to him, Me Ohel Moed Lemor. So Hashem spoke to Moshe from the Ohel Moed, while Moshe was not in the Ohel Moed. It doesn't say Be Ohel Moed, Me Ohel Moed. So Moshe is standing there outside with the rest of the people, and he hears Hashem's voice, and the other people specifically do not, right? Which makes sense with the next verse, because it says, Daber el bnei Yisrael ve'amart alehem. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Adam ki yakriv mekem karban me'Hashem la'Hashem. When a person brings from himself or from themselves a korban to Hashem, min ha-behema, min ha-bakar, min ha-tzon, from the animal, from the cattle, from the flocks, takrivu et karbanchem. That's what he can bring a korban from. Can't bring a korban from polar bears or jungle creatures or underwater sea urchins, whatever it is. The only kind of creatures that you can bring a korban from are from the flocks, from the cattle, from the sheep, goats, rams, cows, right? Okay. We're going to deal with a number of issues here. The first is the language. Okay? Both of these issues are going to have to do with the language. One is the language that has to do with all of the speaking that's going on. Daber el bnei Yisrael ve'amart alehem. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them. Now, if you recall, we've mentioned in the past that there's perhaps a difference in Dibur and Amira, and we've spoken about this in different contexts, but Dibur is usually a harsher kind of speaking, and Amira is usually a kinder, gentler sort of speaking. The kind of speaking you'd use for somebody you're trying to convince or somebody you're trying to mollify, as opposed to Dibur, where is usually a kind of language where you're speaking to somebody who you're trying to command or recuse or reprimand, perhaps. So that's the kind of language that's being used, and people speak about that. But the Netziv, the famous one of the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, so he says in Ha'amek Davar, his commentary on the Torah, that these two speakings are two different things altogether. Watch what happens here. Daber al bnei Yisrael ve'amart alehem, hay amart alehem kaful, v'arav Avram ibn Ezra, right? La'alan chaf gimel yud, in chapter 23, verse 10. V'chein haRamban la'alan chaf aleph. So the Ramban says the same thing as the Ibn Ezra. He says it in 21:1. Pirish Diber el bnei Yisrael sheyit'asfu alav v'achar kach ve'amart alehem. So the two uses of language here, Daber el bnei Yisrael, means to gather the Jewish people. So like, hey, y'all, come listen to this. That's the Daber el bnei Yisrael. Ve'amart alehem, and then speak to them and say to them what I'm going to tell you to say to them about where korbanot come from, right? So that's two different things. So one is to gather them, Daber el bnei Yisrael. Ve'amart alehem is speak to them. All right. Let's go on. Nira, and it seems to me, Zehu Gamkein Amira Mitorah Shabal Peh. But there's something else here. And by the way, Ha'amek Davar very often in his commentary points out that almost every verse points to the greatness and the importance of Torah Shabal Peh, right? Of the oral law. Right, because of course he's a Rosh Yeshiva, right? So that's kind of an important thing for him. But also, it's important to remember that he was writing in the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, and there was a lot of already movement then for reform and for lack of a better word, a changing of the importance of the oral law of the rabbinic tradition. So he's going to defend it. But one of the ways he's going to defend it is like this, right? So one of the ways you can say Daber al bnei Yisrael v'amart alehem, Daber al bnei Yisrael means, okay, you're right, gather them, right? But it also Daber al bnei Yisrael means teach them. V'amart alehem is teach them basically, and I will speak to you, you Moshe, you're going to have the Torah Shabbal Peh, right? And then you need to give that over to the Jewish people. You have to give them the written law. You have to teach them the written law. You have to also teach them the oral law. So there's two different ways of speaking. There's an oral law speaking, and there's a written law speaking. And that's how the Netziv understands this verse. V'nitztava Moshe Rabbeinu shemitchila daber perush shebekatav. So he first has to command them based on the explanation of the verse. So like I said, there's a written law, and he has to teach it to them, and he has to explain that to them. And afterwards, Torah Shabbal Peh. And after that, he has to teach them something different, something that is not in the written law, something that's barely even hinted to in the written law. He needs to teach them as the oral law. So, for example, and there's any number of examples. Think of any mitzvah, and you'll have examples of this. It says to keep Shabbat. How do you keep Shabbat? Aside from not starting a fire, what else do you do? That's it. You start a fire, and then the rest is it's just Shabbat just comes naturally. No, there's more things to do. There's a lot of mitzvot. You have to dress special. You have to speak special, walk special. You have to eat special foods. It's 3 meals. All of that is Torah Shabbal Peh. It doesn't say that in the Torah. I mean, there's hints to it. There's references, but it doesn't actually say it out loud. Any other mitzvah? Take some of the classic examples. Mezuzah. How is a mezuzah supposed to be written? What's supposed to be written in it? And where is it supposed to go? And anything else? Tefillin. How do we know that it's supposed to be a black leather box? It doesn't say that anywhere in the Torah. How do we know that there's supposed to be Shema and the 4 compartments or anything else? None of that is in the Torah. That's all Torah Shabbal Peh. So that is the Ber el bnei Yisrael ve'amart alehem. Two different things. First, interpret the verses of the written law, and then teach them the oral law. Both of those are important for anybody to live a fully Jewish life. They need to know that there's a written law and there's an oral law, and the oral law has just as much legitimacy as the written law in many regards. It's important to remember, worth mentioning, and he's basically saying this too, the written law makes no sense without the oral law. Without the interpretation, the written law, it's gobbledygook. As we've seen before in previous times from Rav Hirsch, it's basically like science notes that people take when they're studying science, right? It doesn't make sense to anyone else, but they'll understand it because each of the notes that's been written down is a reference to something that this person heard in a lecture. That lecture is the oral law, right? The Jewish people heard the oral law from Moshe. And then the written law was sort of like science notes, right? Like notes that help them remember some of the pieces of the written law and put it all of the oral law and put it all together. Right? All right. Good. It's a good start. Let's get right into the next part of the verse. Now, remember we said, if you recall, the verse says, second verse in Vayikra says, Ki yakriv mikem korban. When you bring a korban from yourself. It's a very strange phrase. The word mikem seems completely, this word right here, is the fourth word, and fourth from the last word on the second line, mikem. That word seems completely superfluous. You could have said the exact same, even translation, without the word from yourself. So why is it there? Let's see how they translate it in English. You shall choose your offering from the herd. No. When any of you presents an offering of cattle, no, they didn't translate it at all. Yeah, they didn't even translate it. It should be when you speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any of you presents an offering from yourself of cattle to Hashem. So why of yourself? So we're going to have an interpretation from the Or HaChaim, Rav Chaim ben Attar of Morocco. Or HaChaim has a brief, beautiful essay here that's, I think, relevant to many of us who are involved in Kiruv Rechokim. It's a very special mitzvah of bringing people closer to Torah and mitzvot. Many of our friends and relatives, neighbors, might not be observant yet, as I like to say, and so it's worthwhile to know that there is such a mitzvah as to bring people back closer to Torah, which I hope we're fulfilling. And he writes about this in this pasuk. Ki yakriv mikem, tzarech ledat. We need to know. Lama hutzrach lomar mikem. Why does it say this word mikem? He's bothered by this. Od. Furthermore, lama echer lomar mikem achar zikron hamifal mimenu. Why did it wait to write mikem until after it mentioned that he brings, sikiyakri, like I said, he brings from himself. It should have said it before. From your flock, you should bring. We're not Yoda, right? We're speaking completely disjointedly here. It would have been fit to say it the other way. First, you say who it is that we're talking about, and then you say what the person's doing. John hits the ball. Not the ball was hit by John. It's sort of, besides the passive language issue, there's other issues. Rabbatin Zal Amru Shaba Lema'et Mumar Shab Yisrael. So our rabbis, and he's quoting a Gemara in the beginning of Chulin. Is that this might be talking about a mumar of the Jewish people, and mumar is somebody who is literally translates as heretic, but we're not going to use that translation so much here. The Jews of today who are not keeping Torah mitzvot, it's not from their own knowledge base. It's not basically they're not on purpose. They're not on purpose trying to fight with God as earlier heretics might have been doing. They just don't know any better. They have questions and they don't have the right places to ask those questions. They don't know how to find the rabbis who can give decent answers to logical questions that they have. Baruch Hashem, many of us found the right places to ask the right questions, and that's how we are where we are. But not everybody has that opportunity. So these people, even these heretics, quote unquote, Shadashu min habehema, the rabbis of the Talmud say that they are that from the animals, from the flocks, shehevi mumar. What does that mean? So what the Gemara continues. Mi'ed mumar lekol haTorah kula. So the verse is basically trying to exclude somebody who's rebelling against the entire Torah, Ola avodah zara sheshukula b'chol Torah, or somebody who's rebelling against the who's trying to be involved in idolatry and avodah zara, which is equal to somebody who's trying to rebel against the entire Torah, because avodah zara is that serious that it's like somebody who follows avodah zara is basically rejecting the entire Torah. It includes a mumar who is not rebelling against the entire Torah. And according to what they're saying, according to the rabbis, nearly yeshiv gamma sheyecher lomar mikem. What they're saying is that the Torah is saying you, in other words, this person, this Adam, right? She'im haya omer Adam mikem, this Adam of you, this great, basically what he's about to say is haya nishma shemamayit b'koda b'makom shemarabe. B'makom shemamayit v'lokein ki kavanat hakatuv. What the verse is trying to say is haruboy hu v'gerim hamiut hu b'Yisrael levad. So people are excluded. We're including converts. We're excluding people who are completely rebellious against the entire Torah. Therefore, that's why it says that when you bring them in. What's this saying? Now let's put it all together. So he says, "V'nira od lefarish al pi masha amr b'chulin." We can now explain what it says in the Gemara in Chulin. Sheheviu braita zo shedarshu mikem lehotzi hamumar. That mikem excludes the mumar. Vehevi acharecha braita shedarshu. And then it brings another braita, which is a braita is on par with the Mishnah. It's an earlier source, earlier than the Talmud. Me'am haaretz prat lemumar. So people, so just the regular masses, right? Rabbi Shimon Omer Hashav Midato. So you should. So this is about somebody who rebels from lack of knowledge. Ram Rusham, and then it says there. The mumar lechol chelev hevi karban al hadam ika b'nayu. The difference between these two is that a mumar will eat chelev, this forbidden fat, and he will by accident perhaps drink blood and bring an offering for that accident, right? As we've said before, you can only bring an accident for you can only bring a korban for an accidental sin. Kamar sham chada b'chatat v'chada b'ola. Adkan. So that's a whole quote from the Midrash, from Torah Kohanim. And then now he gets to his point. So based on all that we've said, this is what I really wanted to focus on. This Adam who's bringing the korban, let's go back to the verse just to explain it better. We're missing the logic here. The Ber Bnei Israel, speak to the Jewish people. Amarta alehem, speak to them, say to them, Adam ki yakriv mikem korban. And Adam, which is not just, it doesn't say ish, it doesn't say, Plony, it says Adam. Adam is considered a highly respected type of person. A highly respected type of person, a leader type. Any of you could be leaders. Ki yakriv mikem korban. To bring a korban, mikem. Korban from the word karov, a closeness, should bring people, mikem, from yourself. In other words, your type of people. In other words, your Jewish brothers and sisters. You should bring them La Hashem, to Hashem, min habehema, from the ignorant masses that they're in, from the lack of knowledge that they have. You have the opportunity to bring mikem from yourself, from them. You're able to bring them La Hashem, to Hashem. And that's the way the Or HaChaim is learning this verse. It's not just a verse about in ancient times the Jewish people used to bring sacrifice, but we bring sacrifices today. And again, sacrifices is the wrong word. We're not sacrificing these people. It's the other way around. We're elevating them. Sacrifices are an elevation. We're elevating these people. We're able to teach them. We're able to bring them closer. La Hashem min habehema. And that's the way that the Or HaChaim understands this verse. And I think that's a very beautiful idea that's going to help us with other things as well. Let's skip to chapter 1, verse 7. All right, so we're still in chapter 1. All this time, all these 45 minutes, we've learned just a few verses. We're only on the 7th line in Vayikra. And this is a simple idea, but it's a very beautiful one, and also fits in very nicely with what we've been saying. V'natnu b'nei Aaron. So they're going to take this korban, the kohanim, b'nei Aaron, the sons of Aaron, going to take this korban. B'nei Aaron hakohen. They're going to put eish ala mizbech. They're going to make fire on the altar. V'archu eitzim al ha'esh. They're going to put wood, right, branches and such, onto the fire. So it's a very strange thing. Ordinarily, obviously, it makes sense. You start a fire before you cook anything. If I was making barbecue, that's what you would say. The problem here is this. There was already a heavenly fire that came from heaven. A fire came down onto the altar to take these sacrifices. So why are the Bnei Yisrael, Bnei Aaron especially, making a fire on the altar that's going to have a fire come down and take it anyway? So there are a lot of answers, but probably the most famous comes from the Kli Yakar. I'm not sure if you've ever had the opportunity to see this inside. So he says, Afal Pi, even though Sha'esh Yored Min HaShamayim, even though there's a fire that goes down from heaven, Mitzvah Lahavi Min HaHedyot Kedei La'arev Eish Shelamala Shel Mata. There's the idea that somebody down here on this earth, on this transitory terrestrial planet, should make a fire so that will connect the fire from heaven with the fire from below. That's our job. And that's he says that this is also why we do a lot of the things that we do, why there's a Beit Din, why there's a court of justice. Hashem is the judge. Hashem is a shofet kol haaretz. So why do we need judges down here? Let Hashem take care of it. What do we need doctors for? Let Hashem take care of it. So the answer is Hashem wants us to do our bit. Hashem wants us to do our part. And in this case, this symbolism, this fire from earth that is really redundant, it's only because Hashem told us to do it. That fire is symbolic of so many of our actions. Why do we do any of the things we do? It's because Hashem wants us to do it. So, and even in regard to what we just spoke about Kiruv, if Hashem wants to inspire the person, he could do it himself. And Hashem does want to do it, and Hashem does allow such a thing. And it says in Chazal that Hashem leads a person to the direction they want to go. So there's that. And if somebody wants to do teshuvah, Hashem is more than open to that idea. Okay. The last piece that we're going to cover today is no, I take that back. Not the last piece. Okay. We got two more ideas we're going to share today. One from the Pri Tzaddik of Tzaddik Cohen, a Chassidish idea, perhaps, but even that needs to be taught sometimes. And after that, we're going to follow up. We're going to conclude with a beautiful, very important piece from the Chafetz Chaim. Let's begin, shall we? So the Pri Chaim, Pri Tzaddik quotes a verse in this week's parsha about the shlamim, the sacrifice called the shlamim. It's sometimes it's called the peace offering, sometimes it's called the health offering. There's all kinds of different explanations for why it's called the shlamim. The word shalom by itself, you ask a Gentile on the street what shalom means, they'll say it means, oh, I learned in elementary school that means hello and goodbye. Yes, it does. It means that too. It means hello. It means goodbye. It also means whole, like complete. So that's where we have so many of the arguments about what shlamim means. Is it we're trying to make peace? Is it a peace offering? or is it shleimut? It's a unifying offering where we're trying to combine things. So we're going to see one of the opinions today. V'im zevach shlamim korbanot. If your sacrifice is a shlamim, is this wholeness offering. Imina bakarhu. If it's from the flocks, the herd, hikrivet zachar, it has to be male. Im nekeva, together, whether it's sorry. Hikriv min zachar min nekeva, whether it's from male or female. Tamim, it needs to be pure either way. Yakrivenu lifnei Hashem, and you bring it before Hashem. So over here, the Pri Tzaddik has an essay on the shlamim, which is mostly actually about the details of the shlamim, which aren't in this verse, as you can see. There's more details about how to bring a shlamim later on in the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, chapter 7, verses 84 to 86. And over there, amongst some of the details, is this beautiful piece. You're going to have part of the sacrifice has to be in using some of the material. One of them is a golden spoon. There's 12 of them, and each weighed 10 shekels. So the way that the verse says it is like this. Shloshim u'mea v'kara ha'echad kesef shimim mizrak ha'echad kol kesef ha'kelim alpayim arba me'od b'shekel ha'kodesh kapot zahav shtem esrei milayot ketoret asara hakaf. 10, the kaf, the spoon. B'shekel ha'kodesh, in the holy shekel. Kol zahav hakapot esrei me'ah. So they do all the math. 10 times 12 is 120. Is how many shekels it is altogether. So, but it says 10, like that. And so the Zohar there, the big side of quotes, Kasav asara hakaf b'shekel hakodesh asara lemai ka ati ela asara lemasa bereshit v'asara the Matan Torah, the Matan Torah, Chule. So the 10, it says 10 twice, and each of the 10 refers to another 10, says the Zohar. 110 out of the 10 verbal or sayings that Hashem used to create the world. It says in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, in the 5th parak, it says that Hashem created the world with 10 statements. And then 10 is also a reference to the 10 commandments, right? Itkalu b'chada b'shikol chada. So he says that both of these 10 are connected. The Zohar says this. Chashuv im hadibur harishon anochi. So the first statement in the 10 commandments is, I am Hashem your God. Neged, it is against, in other words, it is a reference, it is more than a reference, it is connected to Mamar Harishon, the first saying of Hashem, which was Yihi Or, there shall be light. V'hadibur haravi zachor yom Shabbat. So the fourth saying is the fourth of the 10 commandments is to keep Shabbat. L'kadsha neged Namar Tadsha Haaretz Desha, that the world will spring forth all kinds of life, so etc. etc. He's connecting the different commandments to the 10 statements that created the world. The first one's probably the easiest, right? That's probably why he went with it. It's Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God, and the first statement was, "Let there be light." Hashem is the light of the world. Hashem, he everything that light does, it's warming, it's edifying, it enlightens us. All the things that light can do, Hashem does for us as well. And so these 10 statements are connected to the 10 commandments. That's the Zohar. Right? He explains how that works. Now, Hashem created man in a certain way where we have physical and spiritual needs. And they seem like they're two separate things. We've got our spiritual stuff, that's our holy stuff, that's the stuff we do in shul, and we've got our physical needs. We eat, we drink, we party, whatever it is we do. We Netflix, whatever, right? So whatever it is we do for our physical body seems like a disconnected from our spiritual selves. So what the Pri Tzaddik is saying here is no. That's what the Shlamim means. That's why it's 10-10, not anywhere else. It's 10-10 with the Shlamim. That Shlamim, that same sacrifice that's supposed to symbolize the unity of things, that's the sacrifice where we also have a combination of the physical and the spiritual, which makes sense considering some of the other symbolism of the Shlamim, which he goes into. For example, the Shlamim sacrifice is eaten by people. It has to be eaten by the people who bring the sacrifice, as well as the kohanim. So, as opposed to some sacrifices, which is like the ola, which is completely eaten up by fire, other sacrifices like the chatat, which are eaten by the kohen, you have the shlamim, which are eaten by both the spiritual kohanim and the physical am haaretz are united with the shlamim, because the spiritual and physical are supposed to be united in their ideal state. So that might be another connection to this whole idea of kiruv, because one of the things he writes in this essay, one of the famous quotes from this short essay, is that there's no light that's greater than the one that comes from darkness. And there's no goodness that's equal to the goodness that comes from evil. In other words, somebody who was evil and becomes good, that good is so much better than somebody who's always been good. A goody two shoes all the way along the entire semester, right? Bringing an apple to the teacher, a kiss up, and everything else. Then you have somebody who was a rebel, who's a class clown, whatever, didn't study. Then all of a sudden, towards the end of the semester, they change their ways. They want to become a better student. They realize how important it is. They start respecting the teacher. That student, most improved, whatever you want to call it, that's there's something to be said for that kind of greatness. That's what we have with the Shlamim. He then connects this to the idea of Yaakov Avinu, who was also we have the sort of the physicality of Avraham. He had to go to war, and Avraham had the Brit Milah. These are all physical things. And then you have Yitzchak, who was literally a korban, was given as a sacrifice, who stayed in Israel because he was too holy to leave. Then you have Yaakov, who is a combination of the two. You've got the physical and the spiritual. He had to fight battles, and he also had to maintain holiness. And Ish Tam at the beginning of his life went to yeshiva even when he was in danger, etc. And also Shabbat is the same thing. Shabbat is a combination of the physical and the spiritual. You have the physical pleasure of the meals, of the beautiful decorations, the clean house, etc. And then you also have the spirituality of the more tefillah, the Torah reading, the divrei Torah, the learning, and the singing. All of that is supposed to inspire a sort of spirituality as well. Okay. He writes quite a bit about this. I've summarized barely anything. I strongly recommend you take a gander at the essay in your free time if you have it. Okay, let's try to read some of this very important essay from The Chavetz Chaim. The Chavetz Chaim wrote many books. He's famous for the Sefer Chavetz Chaim, Shmirat HaLashon, the Mishnah Brura, for Halacha, for his laws of Lashon Hara, etc. A lot of people don't know that he was a big believer in the imminent arrival of Mashiach. Right? He lived a long life, and throughout his life, he was totally prepared for Mashiach to come at any minute. He had bags packed under his bed for whenever he'd have to go get his luggage to go greet Mashiach. Right? He was a Kohen, so he studied the laws of korbanot in depth. But besides studying the laws and even writing books about the laws of the korbanot, he also wrote essays about how important it is to study these things. And I think this is a very fitting way to conclude the class on Vayikra, at least Parshat Vayikra, with understanding how important it is to know this. We know that he writes, let's just get to the underlined portion here, Aval tzarich lisbonen im ein derabenu davrenu rak mesefa lechutz chas v'shalom. So we have to know that are we telling the truth when we say certain things like ki im be'emet pita ani l'shia. So we know the Gemara says one of the things will be asked when after 120. When we're up in Shemayim, one of the questions we're going to be asked is, did you believe in the coming of Mashiach? And you're going to say yes, probably. Or you're going to try to say yes. And the Chavetz Chaim reminds us we have to be sure not to be liars when that happens. Besides the fact that very often in our own tefillot, we say things like, sorry, trying to find it here. It's very hard to read. If you really believe, basically, I'll just say it in my own words. If you really believe in the coming of Mashiach, then you'd have to study the laws of what's going to be when Mashiach comes. He says it's true that there's such a thing as teku. There's certain things that we say Eliyahu Navi is going to answer when right before Mashiach comes, or when Mashiach comes. Eliyahu is going to answer certain things, certain questions we had in the Gemara. But it doesn't say that he's going to teach us the stuff that we're supposed to know, the halachas of, without the Gemara, without the tekus, without the machloket, without the difficulties. There's a lot of laws of kachim that the Rambam wrote down. These are the laws. This is how this korban is brought. This is how this korban is brought. So if you're a Kohen, if you're not a Kohen, you don't need to know all of the laws in such detail, because you're not going to be bringing the korbanot. The Kohen is going to do that. But the stuff that you need to know, how to take care of an animal, what a mum is, you're going to bring in. You're going to first day, action. First scene of you coming to the Beit HaMikdash after it's rebuilt with Mashiach. You're going to bring your animal, right? What's going to happen? The first thing is going to happen is the Kohen's going to say, show me your animal. And you're going to say, oh, here it is. And they're going to say, why'd you bring a dog? I didn't know I couldn't bring a dog. You're supposed to know what kind of animals you're allowed to bring to the korban. So let's say that was ridiculous. Of course, you're not going to bring a dog. You'll bring a cow. You're going to bring a cow. They're going to look at the hoof and say, that scratch on that hoof, that means that's a mum. It's a damaged animal. You can't bring a damaged animal to the Beit HaMikdash. What's a mum? Well, how damaged is damaged? These are all halachot that we do know. A scratch on a hoof, is it a big deal? Is it really a mum? I don't know. And if I don't know, that means I don't really anticipate Mashiach coming any second. It means I don't want him to come any second. I don't want to be ready for that. I'm not ready for that. So that's a dangerous thing. And so that's what the Chavetz Chaim writes here in Asifat Zekanim in the last chapter, chapter 12. he goes into quite a bit more about how we say in our davening, that we're waiting for Mashiach. We say it in Ashrei, we say it in Shemona Esrei, we say it in the benching. Mashiach should come any second. And wait, you really want him to come any second? We want Mashiach now? Really? It doesn't look like it, the way you're acting, the way you don't know the halacha of how you're going to behave when Mashiach does come. So to fix that is very important. And then indeed, we're going to be demonstrating that when we want Mashiach to come, and the way we're going to do that is by bringing these Jews back to Torah, back to mitzvah observance, mikem, from ourselves. We're going to bring them closer to Hashem, and God willing, the same should happen to us. We should only see good things from our efforts. Have a good rest of your week, and hope to see you all on Shabbat.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Take
Thank
care.
you.